How many have have heard about Princess Carolina already? No?
Just familiar with the name.
All right.
Not this one.
Yeah, this one.
Okay.
Are you sharing this on Zoom?
No,
Yeah, that's.
this is being shared on Zoom. This is,
Okay.
it works. We just learned. Oops, I keep catching my foot to the board. Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. So again, thank you for having me. I just wanted to give you an idea of the story of the Princess Carolina collection and the scope of the collection. It's quite a large collection at this point. So we're going to just talk about this here for a few minutes, and then we're going to head to the storage room where you're going to be able to see the collection in person. So you're going to see the figures today. So it's just down the road from there. Princess Carolina was kind of an accident. It was found in New York City in 1982 as part of a routine archaeological site survey. And at the time, there was a developer named Howard Ronson who had hired a cultural resource management firm called Soil Systems and to conduct an archaeological survey of the site prior to construction. And in one of the last test holes conducted by Soil Systems that you can see at the image on the left here, they found the remains of what could possibly be a ship. And so they decided to call two maritime archaeologists to discuss what this found could possibly be. More information. So this is the site map. This is currently located at 175 Water Street in Manhattan, New York. And it's also, I like this site because it's a good example of maritime archaeology is not always like in a submerged situation. Here we're really very much in the category of a maritime landscape. And so the reason why this possible ship ended up in the middle of Manhattan is because since the beginning of the 1700s, the city had been slowly claiming land from the rivers. And so the Ronson's shipwreck was one of many ships at the time who could no longer fulfill their original purpose. So they were used as cribbing around Manhattan. There was a more recent example at the World Trade Center in New York, where in 2014, a Revolutionary War ship was also found. So it was common practice. So back on the excavation, in order to better assess the remains, they started opening up a bit a hole that was larger, and this is when they realized that the age, the style, of the construction features proved that this was really one of a kind in terms of shipbuilding. So the archaeologists then created a proposal with several options for digging, and that they presented to their shareholders at the time. And then they recommended an extra month of excavation to fully uncover the ship. And the developer, Howard Ronson, decided it was worth it, and he kindly supported both financially and with equipment the whole project. So it was a pretty big deal because it's quite expensive. Any daily kick can cost a lot. And so this is how the permission that was given to also recover what happened to be, for the archaeologists, the most unique section, the bow. And they were given what they asked for, which was exactly a month. And so they assembled a team of 46 specialists, so technicians, archaeologists, and they uncovered the forward 18 feet of the ship and recovered. And so they were quite surprised by how well preserved the wood was. You can see here, this is one of the deck. It looks brand new. And the ship had been stripped of most of its fittings above the waterline, but appear to be pretty intact, including the decks, from about 5 feet below the water lines to the keel. And yeah, this type of preservation is quite spectacular for wooden ships in general, because they tend to be to degrade very, very much. Like it's difficult to have such a well-preserved wood. But so here it was buried in a static freshwater log environment, and because it was nicely filled on the inside and on the outside of the hull, there was not much movement, and so it maintained its shape with very little distortion. So these are more views during excavation. There are two archaeologists here on the bottom left photo that are documenting the site, in general, documenting and sharing such findings is one of the most important steps for such archaeological findings, especially for sites like this one that are going to be destroyed or not visible. So all timbers were tagged and recorded in place, and they documented down to the ceiling planks. So that's the middle photo here. Before removing these ceiling planks over the frame so that they could document the outer curve of the hull along the length. So this is the bow. All bow elements were removed from the site in only 2 days, the last 2 days of their contract.
And what year was this buried?
This was buried in 1743. Yeah, we're going to come to that, to what exactly it was and how they identified the ship specifically. So the timbers were then transported to a laboratory in Groton, Massachusetts for a continued study, but also for conservation with the best practice at the time. And in 1985, the collection was loaned to the Mariners Museum, so it came here. And then conservation happened here again from 1985 to 1988. And in 1988, the collection was still belonged to the developer, Howard Ronson, but then he decided to donate it to the museum. And the idea of receiving this collection here was to reconstruct the bow and place it on exhibit in the Chesapeake Bay Gallery. This is currently where the library is stored at the museum, so by the entrance over there. But unfortunately, at the time, there was a change in leadership, and so the project lost momentum. And so the timbers were then left in an uncontrolled environment in the basement of the museum. So this was not the brightest moment.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to 331 timbers, there was a large collection of associated field materials. So the ship was used as cribbing, so it was landfill. And we have about 14,000 artifacts that were recovered on site as well. Everything from colonial era New York City. And all this still needs to be studied. We have it here. And then we also have all the field notes and the conservation records from the 80s that were added as an archival material to the museum's collection. So we have a lot of the entire documentation. All right, so identifying the ship was tricky, and it took years, it took 15, 20 years almost. It required a combination of multiple disciplines. So starting here with the excavation clues and the construction study, Warren Reese, who was the main archaeologist on site, knew that this was the oldest surviving colonial American-built ship. It was a big deal, and that it was also a merchantman. So he knew that the clues are the following. The first one was that the heavy bow, first of all, showed that it was built in the Americas because there was more framing than necessary, and then the pieces were bulky and clunky, rough, with less finesse than English merchant war vessels at the time. That was the first clue. It was pretty significant too because for this time period, these ships were documented in cargo or routes, but not so much in terms of construction. So that was a very good opportunity to study a vessel of this kind. So Warren Rees also identified that the ship was a combination of an English frigate and a Dutch flyboat. Here, for example, it comes to a fine point for speed at the bow, which he says, like many English ships of the time, but the main hull is bulbous in order to accommodate heavy merchant boats, like many Dutch ships. And as just mentioned, it took several disciplines to identify the ship, and the next clues were found in the wood identification, which combined with the time frame show that the ship was built between Virginia and South Carolina. And this narrowed down the search for Warren Rees to 3 vessels only. But what really made it targeted Princess Carolina specifically was the identification of the shipworms that were in the hull planks. There were 3 different kinds of shipworms, and it looked like the vessel had been in the warm waters of the South Pacific or near a vessel that had been there, contaminated. And Princess Carolina traveled to very large harbors like London, Lisbon, Barcelona, or Madeira, and where it could have been contaminated with this ship. Whereas the 2 other options that Warren Rees was looking at the time did not travel that far or in such large harbors at the time. So we still don't really know 100% that this is Princess Carolina. But years of investigation are really pointing towards it. And this is what we know about the merchantman. Also, we know that it was transporting primarily timbers, tobacco, European goods, and wine across the Atlantic. So Princess Carolina specifically was built in 1717 in Charleston. You have the dimensions here. It had 3 masts, 2 square sails forward, 1 lateen sail aft, 3 capstans. One of them is in the collection. You have the cargo here, mostly made of live oak for the majority of the structure, except for the decking and the masts. It would have been handled by 16 crew members, and on its way to London in 1729, it was caught in a storm and damaged, and then it found its way back to New York City, where then it was used as a floating storage until 1743. And then that's when it was purchased also by developer of the time to extend the island, and so used as floating. So the momentum got lost in the 80s about rebuilding or constructing the bow, and it's only following the launch of a more comprehensive conservation department here in 2017 that we were able to reassess the collection appropriately. So we did that, and we realized that the variations in relative humidity in the basement for over 30 years had led to the development of a fair amount of acidity within the timbers. This is a phenomenon that's pretty well known. It has happened to other renowned shipwrecks like the Vazal, the Mary Rose. So these teams over there are also trying to find solutions for that. But in 2017, we didn't have a treatment for that. What we knew then is that we had to rehouse the timbers so that they would be in a controlled environment so that this phenomenon would not happen, because humidity is actually a catalyst to this acidification. But at the same time, in 2019, we were pretty lucky, and we had this young lady, Christy Outland, with us for a couple of years, who ran a whole lot of tests to find a treatment option for this problem. So now we have a treatment. So we know we need to rehouse the timbers, but we also have a treatment to buffer the timbers so we don't have these white formations that are sulfur oxidation. So again, in 2022, we got lucky and we got supported by the Bronze Star Society for rehousing the project of the collection. And so in May, about almost a year ago, in May 2023, we started one timber at a time. Like we set up the triage, workstations, and we documented the timbers again, and we cleaned the surface of the timbers very roughly. We didn't do the buffering at this stage, not yet. We were also able to hire 2 interns for the summer, and we worked in teams of 4 throughout the summer, so it was from May to September. And we had to use a range of equipment, engine hoist, gantry crane. I don't know if you can recognize here, capstan, one of them. This is a section of the mizzen mast, which is what we have. And here you have one of the capstan brace. And I think the last photo may be the stem or the apron. What the financial support also helped doing was to rent a freezer for the entire summer because the timbers were in an environment that was not protected. There was a fair amount of pests around surrounding the timbers. So we had to deep freeze the timbers for 2 weeks, and like 2 weeks at minus 25 Celsius kills anything in timbers. So that's what we did. We did rotations of all the timbers in a deep freezer before bringing the object inside where you're going to see them today. So eventually, again, after 4 months of hard labor last summer, this was the basement before, and this was the basement after. Finally. And so this is just the beginning here of the modification of the museum to Princess Carolina. We are still intending on reconstructing the bow in one of the exhibit hall. It's going to take a lot of work. We are going to need to scan each timbers probably to work digitally to make a cradle for it before even handling the objects themselves. We also have one of our summer interns that's working towards that. Jules, she wanted to stick around, and now she's working on all documentation and also recollecting our new artifacts numbers and the old exhibit from the excavation. And so, yeah, eventually what started as a 3-month superficial survey that ended up becoming one of the most significant finds of the colonial era America. And for this particular project, it's also a bit more than just about the artifacts. It's also taking, the legacy of the team that worked in the 80s on this particular project. So, this is a very interesting new project. So the archaeologist on site wrote 2 books about the project. He's coming on April 25th here for a lecture at 7 p.m. And yeah, if you can make it, if you're interested, you're going to have more information about that. I believe his first book is currently on sale at the museum's gift shop, and I think this one, I guess, is the one he's going to promote that day. If you have questions, I can try to answer them at this point, and then we're going to head into the storage room to see the timbers.
What will be the final object of the restoration? Obviously, we don't have a Chesapeake Bay Gallery anymore.
Yeah. Well, I guess the idea is to, tell the many stories that you can drag out of this particular shipwreck. There's a lot to say. Again, like, we don't have that many. This is the only merchantman from this time frames. The oldest one built here, so there's a lot to say around that. But it's still like the idea would be really, to rebuild it, reconstruct it, and we can do that. Like the wood is still in very good condition, despite the acidity.
You mentioned pulling a lot of things out of the hole. You had that pie chart that showed the types of things. You still have those that you could play along with it.
Yep, absolutely.
Are there a lot of personal items to cover?
Yeah, yeah. A lot. It seems like maybe there was a shoemaker not far there. We have a lot of leather, like pieces of shoes, pipes, as you saw, knives, all sorts of things. Yeah, it's a trash pile.
Yeah. One of our members visited a museum where they recovered the wreck of a steamboat, like the Missouri River or something like
Yep,
that.
yep.
Tons of things. It was
Yep.
amazing. All the glass and so forth.
Yeah,
More recent than this, so in better shape. But,
yeah.
Does it freezing the timbers damage them?
Does what to them? Sorry.
When you freeze the timber,
Yes.
doesn't the water expand and crack them?
It did not. That was also my fear, but it didn't. I think it was not. They were not enough waterlogged anymore. They were just, they were dry mostly. So again, like the humidity in the air was not doing great things for the sulfurs, but no, they didn't crack.
So both the Mary Rose and the Vasa, and I've had the occasion to see both.
Yeah.
Used the resin technique. Was that because they were submerged? The resin was used to drive the water out?
So in this case, this is what they did in the 80s as well. And when you saw this gentleman with like a mask and a big brush, this is what he was doing too. He was adding some what's called polyethylene glycol. Okay. So the treatment was done on those. Some of them were after that. You do a freeze drying treatment, which is the best way to not have any cracks on the wood. But these particular ones had to, in part because of their size, had to be dried, air dried, pretty much slow air dried. But they had that type of treatment too, which is also a factor about the acidity because PEG is pretty hydrophile, so it retains the water, and so then it generates more acid. So this is why also they have the same problems.
Because Vasa and Mary Rose were under treatment for like 30 years. weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Yeah. Surprisingly, this was only in treatment for 60 years. Yeah.
How about the rest of the ship? They saved the bow, but
Yeah.
is it understood that maybe the stern section is still under the parking lot or what?
Yeah, I think it was probably. Yeah, I think it's still out there. Yes, it was just reburied. Financial reasons they could only take only so much, but they managed to study a fair amount of it. So yeah, you get it.
In that regard, the drawing you showed stern ornamentation. So did they actually get to the stern, to the stern, or was that based on conjecture from a period ship?
I think this was more the second option. I don't think they had any real sculpture or subsculptural element that they were able to see for excavating. But we can ask that to Warren Weeks. He comes in 2 weeks. Was there.
Once the conservation is completed, the second phase of preservation comes into play. Is there do we have any idea of a strategy for long-term preservation?
For most of the things in any situation, you want a stable environment. Like this was really detrimental to this. And also what happened in the Vasa, the reason why the Vasa, for example, had these acidity bloom and develop over time, it started in early 2001. There was a very rainy, very wet summer. And everybody was coming to see the Vasa with their rain jacket and their umbrellas. And so they were raising the humidity around the ship a lot. And this is what started the reactions. So I think for anything, when we're going to go next door and you'll see in the, we have storage cabinet for the metals that we keep below 30% relative humidity for equivalent reasons, because oxidation and water is really harmful. So the strategy is just to keep a stable environment. And this is why, yeah, it's a long term.
Yeah.
That's the best way. The other best way is that you remove the oxygen. So you make a bubble of nitrogen or something like that around the objects, but it's limited. Yeah.
Have you met Marika Hayden?
Okay, who's Marika Hayden?
What's that?
Who's Marika Hayden?
Yeah.
Oh, you mentioned the Vasa. She was the curator of the Vasa some years ago. and I
Oh,
thought it
was
might be the
she?
same time you were-
No. I know the current conservators, which they only have 2 people working in conservation right now. But no, I don't know the curator. No. Do you guys want to head to the?
Absolutely.
Yeah, before we do that, can we steal just a few moments to close up the meeting?
Yeah.
And then we'll all go together. Also, I want to remind everyone, before you depart, take your ballot, drop it in the box.
Elsa, thank you.
Thank you. And here to where to check.
If we can,
You know, it's really not, it's not really necessary to reject.
No.
what's that? Okay, for you who are online,
Thank you very much.
do you have anything that you would like to share?
I mean, are you guys closing up? I mean, we could show just like some photos from the battleship tour.
I think I just recommend that they share next month, so you know.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah, we could share it next month. That's fine.
We're recommending that we share anything that hasn't been shared, we share next month, because she'll be waiting.
Yeah, that's fine.
Alrighty then. Then,
Have a great month, guys. See you next month.
Josh, well, I'll see you in New London.
Yes, sir.
Yes, you will.
First, I was still up in New York.
It's in Pennsylvania.
I'm waiting now.
Yeah.
He's talking about you can forget your show.